So I'm 29 and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site that I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I won't give the name of the site or specific areas to keep my job secure. This is a bit of a long story, but I'm confident that anybody interested in this sort of stuff will be satisfied. So, I was in the army at the time when one of my closest friends landed his first job. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs whilst I got my momentum back in regular life and also got myself an SIA license. Eventually, my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal Jason kindly drove me to the site for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth guy in his 50s, I guess, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I'd think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences that I've had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about 2 guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at this site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing there. He's also a lot deeper into this stuff than I was, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we've shared many deep conversations about the subject. Anyway, Saturday night during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time and ready to spend the next 12 hours alone enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. A gaming laptop straight out, albeit on whisper volume of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking as it's out in the sticks somewhat and surrounded by farmland. But I'm pretty used to cutting about in dark places similar from my time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. And for the first few shifts I just heard the odd strange noise, which quite frankly could have been anything, from temperature expansion, contraction to wildlife, you name it. However, on the night prior to the staff returning to work for 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life, which genuinely scared me. It was the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as I put one foot out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off the metal lockers, desk, etc., and at head to torso height. I'm about 6 feet tall. This just didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. The first part of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story medium-sized office building, where there are lots of stone pebbles to walk on before coming out of the back of the offices and onto a relatively large car park, about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed next to me, and to be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel-toe boots and not felt it, so whatever, right? I got halfway across this car park and another landed just in front of me as if it came from behind me. This is where I started to feel things weren't quite right, as the pebbles were way back by this point, and I would have felt it this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left and a huge biffa skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking in between these for about 30 meters, and this is by far the creepiest part of the site as it's so dark and dingy there. And this is where things began to get pretty intense. So I was still walking towards this area and roughly 20 meters away when another pebble hit the biffa skip loudly, about 5 or 6 feet high. In other words, I would have had to get a bit of a run up and put effort into booting a pebble hard enough to hit it like that, high enough, and to match the force it hit with. This really startled me, and I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds, looking all around myself, but there was nobody, and I was equipped with a 400 lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance, but there was nobody whatsoever. I sort of reluctantly carried on out of duty down the alley past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I'd gotten about maybe 10 meters past the first shipment when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and just gave it a huge whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants hole at that point, and it took every ounce of courage to immediately run back into the car park and shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they could not have gotten away in time unless they could contest like Usain Bolt, and even that would be a stretch considering that it probably took me like 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. Now, the guard who gave me the induction is that interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happens, no matter the hour. So I continued to the center of the car park to get a full field view of the site, but of course there was nobody. Suddenly, I just heard these bangs coming from all directions but confined to within the site, shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins with a low trajectory, similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water, I suppose. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me, though, is that the direction that they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse with no windows or doors from my point of view. So these tiny stones were being thrown at me from, like, an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there was 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, but they just sort of whizzed by my legs left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in the winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me, and not over the warehouse, which would be next to an impossible feat anyway. In any case, I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I have never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humor him anyway, all the while half scared to death. I called out to it though. I really can't remember what I said, and everything immediately just sort of stopped and went silent. Weirdly enough as well, nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said that he's never known anybody to get terrorized quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the blokes managing the site, and he said that he would check the CCTV footage for any messes. Interestingly, the next shift, a couple of days later, the cleaner who used to be around for a couple of hours after the staff leave called me into the office block to see a document printed out of an email. This was to my security firm about the events, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on the camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I've had very sparse experiences, such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving like 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen. Very annoying, as security often gets the blame for this, understandably too. Cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along the dusty warehouse floor, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I also got another very close friend of mine a job there as well, who was also in the army prior and also a massive skeptic, until now. He literally laughed at myself and Jason whilst we gave him his induction when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh as his attitude soon got set straight, but so a few nights into my other friend, his name is Scott, working there, I got woken up to a phone call at around 1:30 in the morning, and, as you can probably guess, it's Scott with a trembly voice saying that somebody had just sprinted up the stairs, ran through the short corridor, and is currently stood outside the guardroom door. I said, well, you're a security guard, do your job and see who it is. Of course, nobody was there, and nobody could be there, due to the coded doors. Now, I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time at this point. It seems to have I don't know, like weeks or months of calm, followed by short bursts of activity. I've also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had any experience elsewhere besides one place, to which I have a video evidence of that actually, but I'm reluctant to share it, and even then I need permission from the guard who works at that particular site. I've even worked at a number of derelict creepy old mills with nothing strange on it, so this was definitely an experience. I do have one more story about an experience in my teens for another time, and that's pretty much everything that's happened to me, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story, and here's hoping that nothing else happens after this. So I was around 5 to 7 years old when this happened. I lived with my mum and my two sisters. I would see my dad on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We lived in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house next to a funeral home. I used to share a room with one of my sisters, and when I'd wake up in the middle of the night, I would always run into my mum's room and sleep with her because I was scared. So, I come home one night from my dad's house. After a short while of being home, probably 20 to 30 minutes, I decide that I'm going to act like I'm sleeping in my bed, and when my mum comes to check on me, I'm going to scare her. So I crawled into my bed, and for some reason I just immediately passed out. I woke up at around 1:30 in the morning, I think. I ran to my mum's room, as I always did out of fear. I don't know why I was always scared in this house at night, but it was every night. I got in her room, and for some reason she's not in there. I checked the living room, and she's not in there either. I then realized that she probably went to stay the night at her boyfriend's, I think. I immediately booked it right back into my room, though, and I jumped into my bed. A few minutes pass, and now I'm even more scared because I remembered that my sister, who I shared a room with, isn't here either because she stayed the night at her friend's house. After probably 5 minutes, I think, I start to hear pots and pans banging in the kitchen. When I heard this, I went under the blankets right away. This goes on for another 10 minutes, and the whole time it's happening, I'm pinching and punching myself because I was convinced that I was dreaming, which I soon found out that I wasn't. A few minutes after, the continuous noise stopped. I came out from under the blankets, and in the hallway, directly across from my bed, there's a man hanging there in my sister's room. I can see his head, but I can't really see the rest of his body. I think he's wearing a blue tucked-in dress shirt, black dress pants maybe, and black dress shoes, I think. But right after I saw that, though, I think I was just kind of scared into pure terror, and I went back under my blankets, and eventually I passed out again. I told my mum and my sister about it the next day, and they were really freaked out. We moved out approximately maybe 6 months later into my mum's boyfriend's house. Now that I'm 18, turning 19 soon, when I think back on when this happened, I think that there was something from the funeral home, considering how it was dressed. It's weird though, because my friend's grandma lives in that house now, and they haven't experienced anything. All I know is that that memory, it's going to stick with me for as long as I live. So I was in sophomore in high school when this happened, and I haven't gone back. It's midsummer in New England, and my best friend, his name's Andy, and I are just hanging out. I live on conservation land, so aside from the houses at the very front, there are pretty much no other developments, and woodland that spans for acres and acres. The state put down some paths, so I suggested that we go exploring one day. We geared up, I brought my pocket knife, sprayed down on bug spray, and headed out my backyard. Now, we hadn't explored too much, but I did know the area somewhat well, so we decided, to heck with the trails, we're going to be real men and forge our own path. We enter the woods, thickly forested with pine, maple, and oak trees, and make notches in the trees on the way so we can find our way back. It's around noon, so I'm not too worried about it getting dark. After all, the sun sets around 8 p.m. in the summer. But just in case, I keep track of it. We walk deeper and deeper into the woods, about 15 minutes, and the forest just seems to come alive. Bugs, frogs, birds, everything in this forest is loud, slightly irritating truthfully, but it's nice to take in the sights and the sounds, I suppose. But soon we stumble upon a peculiar scene. A perfect circle, probably 20 feet in diameter, that spans from the ground all the way to the sky. I'm perplexed, but Andy is curious, so we decide to go in. The first thing that I noticed, though, was that the overgrown weeds and the grass that surrounded us, they stopped at the perimeter. All vegetation past the line is just dead. Not bare, but just dead, crunching under our feet. I don't just mean the grass either, but the tree limbs that extended in there are also bare, like leaves down the branch until it crosses this line, and then they're just dead. Being the middle of summer, nothing should be dead, and I've never seen a branch behave like that, to be honest. It was at this point, too, that I'm beginning to feel an extreme unease. I turn to Andy and ask him if he feels uneasy, and he says that he feels like we're being watched. I agree. And it's then that we notice the strangest sense that I've ever felt. The entire forest immediately goes silent. Not in rest, but in what feels like maybe suspense. Whatever the case, I'm feeling extremely uneasy now, and I know that we need to leave. We run out of there following our tree marks, and when we get back to my house, the forest is back alive. Ever since then, too, every summer, every winter, a snarl of branches, sometimes leafed and sometimes not, sort of reveals a path through the forest there. I swear, too, that whatever was watching us from that circle that day, it continues to watch that path around that time of year.